Welcome back to the deep dive. Just recently, we saw the crew of the Greek-flagged oil tanker, Sunyan, rescued, finally, on July 6th, 2025.
Right after their ship was hit way back in August 2024.
August 2024, that ship has been burning for nearly a year.
Oh.
It's a pretty stark image, isn't it? A reminder of this crisis just dragging on in one of the world's most vital shipping lanes, the Red Sea.
Absolutely.
And look, this isn't just some distant maritime news item. The Red Sea is this absolutely critical artery for global trade. It's the shortcut, really, connecting Asia to Europe and Africa.
Handles something like, what, $1.2 trillion in trade annually?
Roughly, yeah. So when things go wrong here, you feel it everywhere. Gas pumps, grocery aisles, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission today is to really unpack the complexities of this Red Sea crisis. We're talking about the Houthi attacks, the international responses, and crucially, the economic and legal fallout that, it affects all of us.
Yeah, and what this really shows, I think, is just how tightly wound our global systems are. I mean, this isn't just about ships in some far-off region. It connects directly to global supply chains, to insurance costs hitting your wallet, and it tests how nations actually cooperate, or sometimes how they fail to cooperate when vital interests are on the line. This deep dive, it really shows how a regional conflict can suddenly go global.
Okay, so let's dig into that. We hear the name Houthis constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Who exactly are they, and what's their stated reason, their motivation for these attacks?
Well, according to their own public statements, their main reason is solidarity with the Palestinians. They claim they're trying to help get humanitarian aid into Gaza and want the war there to end. That's the official line they put out.
But it feels like the targeting has gone way beyond what they initially said, doesn't it? How has that focus shifted?
It really has, and that's a key point. Initially, the Houthis claimed, they were only hitting Israel-linked ships.
Right.
But that changed fast. Our sources show it quickly became indiscriminate attacks, vessels from loads of different nations, and critically, direct attacks on U.S. and U.K. warships. In fact, U.S. Central Command stated pretty bluntly that these Houthi attacks have nothing to do with the conflict in Gaza, and that they impact more than 40 nations. So that suggests maybe a broader agenda, disrupting global trade, perhaps, asserting power.
And their methods, their tactics, they seem pretty varied and, frankly, quite advanced now. What are they actually using?
Oh, absolutely. They've shown a real range. We're seeing long-range ballistic missiles, one-way attack drones, UAVs, and even these uncrewed surface vessels, USVs. Basically, robot boats packed with explosives.
Robot boats.
Yeah. Plus, more conventional small boat attacks. And remember that really dramatic hijacking, the Galaxy Leader, back in November 2023?
I do, yeah.
That wasn't just guys in speedboats. They used a military helicopter for that one. Audacious stuff.
And what are commanders, the ones actually facing these threats, saying about it?
Well, the commander of the French frigate Aquitaine, Jérôme Harry, he talked about the uninhibited violence, said it was quite surprising and very significant.
Uninhibited violence.
Yeah, he specifically mentioned the sheer number of drones, especially the ones that fly really low, just above the water, makes them incredibly hard to spot until the last second. So this isn't some low-tech nuisance. It's a sophisticated, dangerous, and evolving threat.
And just to give you a couple more concrete examples, we mentioned the Sunyan, still burning since August 2024. But sources also detail another attack just recently, July 2025, on a ship called the Magic Seas. So yeah, these aren't rare events. It's a constant danger out there.
Every day.
So, okay, this threat is getting more sophisticated, more indiscriminate. The big question then is, how is the world responding? It seems like a really complex picture.
It is. The main military response you're seeing is Operation Prosperity Guardian. That's the U.S.-led multinational operation, kicked off back in December 2023.
Right, I've heard the name.
It's a big coalition. Over 20 members, U.S., U.K., Australia, Bahrain, Canada, Denmark, Greece, Netherlands. A lot of key allies. And their stated goal is pretty clear: ensure freedom of navigation and the safety of maritime traffic through the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the whole critical area.
And they've put some serious hardware out there, haven't they? What kind of naval power are we talking about?
Oh, yeah, serious assets. The U.S. Navy's Carrier Strike Group 2, that's the carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, with its escort destroyers like the Gravely and Mason. They've been a constant presence.
A carrier group, okay.
Plus, the British have sent destroyers like HMS Diamond, HMS Duncan, other nations contributing frigates. Deploying a carrier group, it's not just symbolic. It gives them massive air defense reach and power projection. A direct answer to how widespread this Houthi threat is.
And are they managing to stop these attacks? And what about the legal side when, say, A U.S. warship gets directly involved. That must change things.
They've definitely shown they can intercept threats. They've been neutralizing threats, as the reports say, shooting down UAVs, missiles, disabling boats, destroying those USVs. It takes constant vigilance, huge resources.
Okay.
But your point about U.S. warships is critical. By actively engaging the Houthis, they're not just bodyguards for commercial ships anymore. They've entered what's legally called a non-international armed conflict, ANIA.
ANAE.
Right. Conflict between a state and a non-state group. And in that context, U.S. warships themselves become lawful targets for the Houthis. That dramatically raises the stakes, changes the whole legal game for those sailors.
Wow. Okay. So besides just defense, the coalition has also been hitting back, right? Airstrikes in Yemen.
Yes, they have. Targeting Houthi military sites, missile launchers, air defense, radars, even apparently deeply buried weapons storage. And the scale is significant. The Houthis themselves claimed 931 American and British airstrikes by early January 2025.
931, that's a lot?
It is. The idea is obviously to degrade their ability to launch attacks, to deter them.
But then there was the ceasefire announcement. But the Houthis said they'd keep attacking some ships. What's going on there?
Yeah, that was back on May 6th, 2025. Former President Trump announced a stop to U.S. strikes, citing a ceasefire deal with the Houthis.
Okay.
But, crucially, the Houthis immediately said publicly they would continue targeting Israel and Israeli-linked vessels. So it looks like the ceasefire is perhaps limited just to direct U.S. Houthi fighting, not a total halt to Houthi attacks on shipping. It really shows how tricky finding a real lasting solution is here.
Right. And it's not just the U.S.-led group, is it? The EU has its own operation, too.
Correct. Operation Aspides. The European Union launched that in mid-February 2024. Their focus is specifically on safeguarding shipping, escorting vessels, providing missile defense.
So they don't do airstrikes.
Exactly. That's the key difference. Aspides does not conduct attacks on land targets. Its members include countries like France, Germany, Italy, Greece, Sweden, quite a few. A separate European effort focused purely on maritime protection.
And we should probably mention, too, there are other countries like China, India, Egypt, Pakistan. They have ships there, too, doing their own patrols independently.
That's right. It shows how widespread the concern is. It's not just a Western issue.
This whole crisis, it must be putting a huge strain on allied navies, on organizations like NATO even. What are we learning about their capabilities under this kind of pressure?
Well, it's definitely a major test. Sources say the crisis highlights the need to capitalize on allied naval capabilities for better deterrence. But honestly, if you connect the dots, it also reveals some pretty big weaknesses.
Such as?
NATO navies, for example, are described as under-resourced and underprepared for this kind of sustained high-intensity fight. You mentioned the French frigate Aquitaine.
Yeah, running out of missiles.
Exactly, having to leave the fight because it ran out of ammunition. That's not just one ship's problem. It points to a bigger issue with stockpiles, with readiness for this level of combat.
So what needs to change?
Well, there's an urgent need for modernization, better air and missile defense, electronic warfare, cyber capabilities, projecting power from the sea, and updating doctrines, how they actually fight together in these crowded coastal areas, how they handle things like drone swarms. Basically, the standing NATO maritime groups, the SNMGs, they need a structural shift. They need to be ready for high-intensity war, not just the peacekeeping roles they might have focused on in the past.
Okay, shifting gears from the military side to the market, what does all this chaos in the Red Sea actually mean for, the average person? The economic ripples, the human cost.
Oh, the economic impact is just massive.
Yeah.
Riding ships all the way around Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, that adds 10, 14 days to a trip.
10 to 14 days.
And it's not just time. It costs up to an extra $1 million per voyage, just in fuel and operational time. Think about that multiplier effect.
Yep.
By late 2024, the estimate was that global shipping costs had already jumped by $200 billion.
$200 billion.
Yeah. And that cost doesn't just disappear. It gets passed down the chain, eventually to consumers.
Can you give us some specific examples of how that's hitting trade?
Sure. Big players like Maersk, CMA, CGM, BP, Shell, they suspended or diverted ships from the Red Sea. Maersk estimated the industry lost 15–20% of its capacity just from these diversions. Fewer ships moving goods as quickly.
Right.
Look at the Suez Canal, vital for Egypt's economy. Their revenue dropped from about $9.4 billion down to $7.2 billion in the 2023-24 financial year. That's a massive hit.
Huge hit.
And even more direct, the port of Eilat in Israel. It basically relies on Red Sea traffic. It declared bankruptcy in July 2024, an 85% drop in activity, half its workers potentially losing their jobs.
Wow.
And for you, the consumer, spot container shipping rates, say from Shanghai to Europe, they spiked by an average of 256% between December 23 and February 24. That's why things get more expensive.
256%. And what about behind the scenes, the insurance market? That must be getting hammered.
Absolutely critical point. The Red Sea is now officially classified as a war risk zone by insurers. Premiums have shot up 40-60% since late 2023.
40 to 60% higher.
Yeah. And some insurers are just flat out refusing coverage altogether for ships with links to Israel or the U.S. So it's not just more expensive, it's actually harder to get insurance at all, making it riskier and more costly just to move stuff.
And beyond the money, there's a human cost too, right?
Yeah.
Especially with aid shipments.
Yes, and this is really tragic. These Houthi attacks, they've held up vital aid shipments. For Sudan, for example, shipping companies are understandably nervous, even with naval protection.
Yeah.
So aid agencies are forced to reroute around Africa too. Adds weeks, adds huge costs. In places like Sudan, where millions are facing famine, those delays, that extra expense, it means food, medicine, critical supplies just aren't getting there fast enough. It makes a terrible situation even worse.
Just awful. Okay, so stepping back a bit, what about the legal side of things and this rise in private security we're hearing about?
Yeah, the legal angle is really complex. How do you classify these attacks under international law? It actually affects how nations can legally respond.
How's
Well, depending on the details, an attack might be seen as piracy if it's for private gain on the high seas. Or it could fall under the laws of war, specifically non-international armed conflict, especially if it targets military assets like a U.S. warship or Houthi gear.
Okay.
Or some acts might fit the definition of maritime terrorism under a treaty called the 1988 SUA Convention, basically. Acts that endanger safe navigation. Each label carries different legal weight, different implications.
And the UN Security Council weighed in, didn't they, with Resolution 2722?
They did, January 2024. It clearly demanded the Houthis release the hijacked Galaxy leader, and, importantly, it explicitly affirmed the right of countries to defend their vessels from attacks. That gives a strong legal backing to operations like Prosperity Guardian.
Got it. And meanwhile, on the ships themselves, practically speaking, commercial companies are taking things into their own hands with private security.
Yes, that's a fascinating development, a real surge in reliance on private maritime security solutions. More and more commercial ships are hiring onboard armed security teams, ASTs, and investing in countermeasures.
Like that Magic Seas incident you mentioned.
Exactly. The attack in July 2025, it was successfully fought off by the ship's own armed security team. It really shows their value in these high-threat zones. For many ships, these ASTs are now the first line of defense.
So demand for armed guards, better radars, drone jamming tech must be booming.
Absolutely. Reports mention companies like Elbit Systems developing specific drone countermeasures. The private sector is definitely stepping up to fill perceived security gaps. It's a whole new market emerging from this crisis.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, we've seen the Houthis' stated aims versus their actual tactics, the huge international military response alongside private security, the massive economic shockwaves, and these really complex legal questions. It just shows how tangled everything is, doesn't it? How one regional flashpoint can just cascade globally.
It really does. What's striking here is how this conflict, relatively localized in geography, is pushing boundaries globally. International law, military cooperation, even the basic economics of how we trade, it's all being tested in ways we haven't really seen for decades. It forces us to rethink things we took for granted, like the freedom of the seas.
And maybe a final thought for you, the listener. How might this Red Sea crisis permanently change things? Even if the fighting stops tomorrow, could we see lasting shifts in shipping routes?
Yeah.
A fundamental change in how we think about maritime security. What does freedom of navigation truly mean in a world where these choke points are becoming increasingly contested? Something to definitely keep thinking about.